Nobody on Farpoint Station paid attention to the old freighter that docked at Bay 12. It was a scratched-up, dented thing called the Nomad, and it looked like it had been dragged through an asteroid field and put back together with tape and stubbornness. The kind of ship that made dock workers shake their heads and wonder how it was still flying. Inside, the crew was doing what they always did, arguing. "It is your turn to clean the recycler," Goss said, his deep voice rumbling through the cargo hold like distant thunder. The big Drothai stood near the kitchen area, stirring a pot of something that smelled surprisingly good for a ship with a broken ventilation system. His green, scaled hands moved gently, carefully, the way they always did. Goss was large enough to crush a metal beam, but he handled a wooden spoon like it was made of glass. "I cleaned it last cycle," Ollie Fenn shot back from underneath a wall panel where only his legs and boots were visible. Sparks flew from whatever he was working on. "I have a rotation chart. It is literally on the wall." "Your rotation chart has my name on every other line." "Because you are the one who keeps putting fish bones in it." Danny Harlow listened to them bicker and smiled to himself. He was on his knees in the cargo hold, sealing a crack in the floor plating with a welding torch. His hands were steady. They always were. 20 years as a combat medic had trained the shake out of them a long time ago. Now he used those hands to fix leaks and haul cargo, which he preferred. Reva walked in, her small taloned feet clicking on the metal floor. She was Pelori, barely reaching Danny's chest, with soft gray feathers and large dark eyes that always looked a little worried about something. She carried a data pad and was reading from it in her quick, bird-like voice. "We have 3 overdue deliveries," she said. "The grain shipment to Outpost 7, the medical supplies for the Drothai colony on Fell's World, and the engine parts for that Pelori transport that has been stuck at Waypoint for 2 weeks. "We will get to them," Danny said without looking up. "We are also out of credit with the fuel station. We will figure it out." Reva made a small chirping sound that Danny had learned meant she was worried, but did not want to push. She had been his first mate for 6 years now, and in that time she had become the closest thing to family he had left. They all had. Goss, Ollie, Reva. This little crew on this broken ship was everything Danny cared about in the galaxy. He finished the weld, stood up, wiped his hands on his pants, and said, "All right, let us go get those supplies and get back to work." Farpoint Station was busy that day. Traders from a dozen species moved through the wide corridors, haggling, arguing, and laughing in languages that blended together into a constant hum. Danny and Reva walked side by side toward the trade market on the station's middle ring. They never made it there. The first sign of trouble was the sound, a deep rhythmic pounding that came from the main docking corridor, boots, hundreds of them hitting the metal floor in perfect unison. Danny stopped walking. Reva stopped beside him. Around them, other traders and travelers began to slow down and look toward the sound. Torvan soldiers marched into the station in tight, precise columns. They were tall, insectoid, with dark armored exoskeletons and 4 arms that ended in sharp, clawed hands. Their eyes were black and expressionless. Each one carried a pulse rifle across their chest. A Torvan officer stepped forward and activated a broadcast speaker on his wrist. His voice echoed across the entire station. "By order of High Prelate Sarvan, this station is now under the jurisdiction of the Torvan Dominion. All non-Torvan occupants will vacate within 1 standard cycle. Resistance will be met with force." Silence, then chaos. Traders began scrambling for their ships. Families grabbed their children. Shopkeepers started packing their goods in a panic. Danny did not move. He watched as Torvan soldiers began pushing people aside, shoving them toward the docking bays. He watched as they overturned market stalls and kicked supplies across the floor. His jaw tightened, but he stayed still. Then one of them grabbed Reva. A Torvan officer, a younger one with fresh markings on his armor, seized Reva by her wing and yanked her sideways. She cried out in pain and stumbled to the ground. Her feathers bent at a wrong angle. She looked up at Danny with wide, frightened eyes. Something in Danny went very quiet. He did not yell, he did not threaten. He simply stepped forward, took the officer's arm, and broke it. Twice. The sound was sharp and clear, like dry wood snapping. The officer screamed and collapsed. Danny stepped over him, knelt beside Riva, and gently checked. Her winged. You are okay, he said softly. It is not broken, just bent. 10 Torvan rifles pointed at his head a second later. Danny was arrested, dragged to a holding cell deep inside the station while Rivas screamed his name from the corridor. The officer he had broken, a young soldier named Bren, filed a report to the Dominion flagship. In his report, he called it an unprovoked attack by a human on a Torvan sovereign officer. He left out the part about Rivas. The report reached High Prelate Sarvan within the hour. He sat in his command chair aboard the warship Teeth of the Empire, surrounded by officers who had helped him conquer 40 star systems. He read the report, sneered, and signed a declaration of subjugation against Earth and all human territories. His second-in-command, Subcommander Lyell, transmitted the order as instructed. Then she sat alone in her quarters, opened the Galactic Species Archive, and searched for Homo sapiens Earth classification, Death World Category 9. She read the first page. Then she read it again. Her hands began to shake. Lyell had not slept in 31 hours. She sat in the dim blue light of her personal quarters aboard the Teeth of the Empire, surrounded by holographic files that floated in the air around her like ghosts. Each one contained a different piece of information about the species her prelate had just declared war on. She had started reading out of routine. As second-in-command, it was her job to study the enemy before any campaign. She had done it 40 times before for 40 different species, and every time the result was the same. The target species was weaker, less organized, less willing to fight. The Torvan would crush them, absorb their worlds, and move on. This time was different. The file on humans began with their homeworld, a planet called Earth. Lyell read the environmental data 3 times because she was sure the archive had made a mistake. It had not. Earth had active volcanoes that could bury entire cities in ash. It had massive storms that ripped across its oceans with enough force to flatten structures. The ground itself moved, splitting open and shaking everything above it. The planet's atmosphere was 78% nitrogen and 21% oxygen, a gas so reactive that it corroded metal over time. Humans breathed it every moment of every day. They needed it to survive. Lyell leaned back in her chair. The Torvan homeworld was stable, controlled, predictable. The idea of living on a planet that was actively trying to kill its own inhabitants was difficult to process. But it got worse. Earth was filled with predators, not small ones. Massive, powerful creatures that could outrun, outswim, and overpower almost anything in their path. And humans, instead of fleeing from them or hiding underground, had done something no other species in the galactic record had ever done. They made friends with them. Lyell stared at a file entry about an Earth predator called a wolf. Wolves were pack hunters with powerful jaws and sharp instincts. They were dangerous. And humans, thousands of years ago, had approached these creatures, fed them, earned their trust, and slowly turned them into companions. The file showed images of modern humans living alongside the descendants of these wolves, creatures now called dogs, who slept in human homes, played with human children, and would fight to the death to protect the humans they had bonded with. The bonding behavior did not stop with animals. The archive contained hundreds of recorded instances from across the galaxy where humans had formed deep, protective bonds with alien species. A human cargo worker on a Pelori station who had worked triple shifts for a month to pay for medical treatment for a sick Pelori child he had never met. A human soldier who had thrown herself over a wounded Drothai during a pirate raid, taking a plasma bolt to the back so the Drothai would survive. A human engineer who had refused to evacuate a failing space station until every single non-human crew member was safely aboard a shuttle, then manually held a bulkhead door closed with his bare hands for 11 minutes while the last shuttle launched. He died, of course, but the 46 people on that shuttle did not. The file had a term for this. It called it pack bonding. Humans did not limit their protective instincts to their own kind. Once a human decided that someone, anyone of any species, was part of their group, they would fight for that person with a ferocity that defied all logic and self-preservation. And then there was the matter of endurance. Lyell had conquered species that were stronger than humans, faster than humans, and more technologically advanced than humans. But she had never encountered a species that simply refused to stop. The archive noted that humans could continue functioning after injuries that would incapacitate most galactic species. Broken bones healed. Torn muscles repaired themselves. Humans could operate without sleep for days, march for hours without rest, and survive in temperature extremes that ranged from freezing cold to boiling heat. One entry caught her eye. It described a human practice called a marathon, where humans ran a distance of over 42 kilometers, not to escape a predator, not to reach safety. They did it for fun. Lyell closed the file and pressed her hands flat against the table to stop them from trembling. She walked to Sarvan's command chamber and requested an audience. The prelate allowed her in with a wave of one of his 4 hands, barely looking up from the fleet deployment plans spread before him. "Prelate," Lyell said carefully, "I have completed my assessment of the human species. And they are a Category 9 Deathworld species. Their homeworld is hostile, their biology is built for endurance and recovery, and their behavioral patterns suggest an extreme bonding instinct that extends across species lines." Sarvan glanced at her. "Your point?" "My point is that no species in recorded history has successfully subjugated them. Not because they are the strongest or the most advanced, but because every civilization that has studied them has concluded that the cost of fighting them is too high." Sarvan waved a dismissive claw. "The Torvan have conquered 40 systems. We do not retreat from animals." "They are not animals, prelate. They are whatever I say they are. Return to your duties." Lyell left the chamber without another word. She returned to her quarters, sat down, and stared at the wall for a long time. Meanwhile, on Farpent Station, Danny Harlow sat on the cold metal bench of his holding cell. His hands rested on his knees. His breathing was slow. He looked like a man waiting for a bus, not a prisoner on a military station. Ravas stood on the other side of the energy barrier, her feathers ruffled and her eyes wet. "Danny, what are we going to do?" Danny looked up at her and smiled, a small, calm smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "I already sent a message." "To who?" "Home." "What did you say?" Danny's smile faded, and something older and colder settled behind his eyes. "I told them someone hurt my family." 6 hours later and 4 billion kilometers away, a quiet alarm chimed inside Earth Sector Command, a sprawling military complex in orbit around Mars. Admiral Rosa Calloway was halfway through her evening shift when the emergency beacon alert landed on her console. She read the origin tag, Farpent Station. She read the sender, Danny Harlow, retired combat medic, civilian freighter captain. She read the message. She set down her coffee, pushed back her chair, and stood. "Wake up the fleet," she said. Nobody in the room asked why. The colony world of New Garland was not much to look at. A rocky, wind-swept planet with gray skies and thin forests, it had been settled by human miners 60 years ago to extract rare minerals from its deep crust. About 40,000 people lived there, most of them in a single sprawling town built around the main mine shaft. It was the kind of place people came to work hard, save money, and eventually leave. On the day the Torvan 8th Armada arrived, the children of New Garland were in school. The miners were underground. The shopkeepers were opening for the day. And 300 Torvan warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a perfect formation above the planet like a wall of black metal blotting out the stars. High Prelate Sarvan was not aboard. He considered this a minor operation, barely worth his attention. He had sent Fleet Commander Dorvan, a veteran of 12 successful conquests, to handle the subjugation. Dorvan stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Claw of Judgment, and looked down at the small gray world below. He activated the Galactic broadcast channel, so every species with a receiver could hear what happened next. People of Earth and all human territories, you have been declared subjects of the Torvan Dominion. You will surrender all military assets, disband your fleets, and hand over the human criminal Danny Harlow to face Torvan justice. If you do not comply within one standard rotation, the colony of New Garland will be reduced to dust. This is not a negotiation. The broadcast went out. Every station, every ship, every listening post in the galaxy heard it. Then they waited for humanity's response. It never came. No transmission, no counter-broadcast, no plea for mercy, no defiant speech, nothing. The communication channels from New Garland went dead. Every signal beacon on the planet switched off. Every satellite in orbit went dark. The colony's surface lights, visible from space just minutes ago, vanished. The entire planet looked abandoned. Dorvan frowned, scanned for life signs. His sensor officer ran the scan and reported 42,000 biological signatures detected on the surface. They are all still there. Then why are they silent? No one on the bridge had an answer. Dorvan ordered the fleet into low orbit. 300 warships moved into position around New Garland, their weapons charged and ready. Dorvan prepared a ground assault force of 50,000 soldiers. This would be over quickly. The first missile came from inside the largest moon. It was not a conventional weapon. It was an electromagnetic pulse device that detonated in the center of the Torvan formation and instantly disabled the sensor arrays of every ship within a 100-kilometer radius. For 12 seconds, the Torvan fleet was blind. That was enough. Human warships poured out of hiding. They came from behind the two moons, from inside the asteroid belt that ringed the system, from beneath the planet's own cloud cover where they had been sitting with engines cold for days. They were smaller than Torvan ships, faster, and there were far more of them than anyone had expected. Dorvan stared at the tactical display as red dots flooded the screen. How many? 400 and rising. That is impossible. Their nearest military base is 12 systems away. But the humans had not come from their bases. They had come from everywhere. Cargo ships refitted with weapons, mining vessels with reinforced hulls, civilian transports carrying volunteer fighters who had dropped everything and flown across the sector the moment word spread that the Torvan were threatening a human colony. Earth Sector Command had coordinated the response, but the volunteers had come on their own. The battle was unlike anything the Torvan had experienced. The Torvan fought the way they always had, in rigid layered formations with clear chains of command. Every ship had its assigned position. Every commander waited for orders from the one above them. It was disciplined, organized, predictable. The humans fought like water. Their ships moved in small, fast groups of 3 to 5, each one operating independently. They did not wait for orders. They adapted in real time, shifting targets, changing angles, exploiting every gap the Torvan left open. They communicated constantly, short bursts of coded chatter that the Torvan could not decrypt fast enough to respond to. And they did not go for the kill. Instead of destroying Torvan ships, the human packs targeted engines first, leaving ships stranded. Then communications, cutting each ship off from the fleet. Then weapons, rendering them harmless. One by one, the Torvan warships went from deadly predators to floating, helpless metal boxes. Dorvan screamed orders into the fleet channel, but his formation was already shattered. Ships that had never fought without direct orders from above began to panic. Some tried to retreat. Some fired blindly. Some collided with each other in the chaos. It was over in less than 4 hours. Of the 300 Torvan warships, 214 were captured or disabled. The rest scattered into faster-than-light travel, fleeing in random directions. Dorvan's flagship was boarded by a human marine team that moved through his corridors with terrifying efficiency. They did not kill anyone who surrendered. They zip-tied the Torvan soldiers' arms, confiscated their weapons, and offered them water. Water in the middle of a battle. Dorvan was brought to the bridge of a human carrier ship, where a young human officer looked at him and said, "Fleet Commander, your crew will be treated well. We have medical teams standing by for your wounded. Do you have any dietary requirements we should know about?" Dorvan stared at her. He had conquered species, enslaved populations, burned cities, and this human was asking about his diet. The battle report reached Sarvan aboard the teeth of the Empire 6 hours later. He read it in complete silence. His 4 hands gripped the edges of the console so hard that the metal bent beneath his claws. 300 ships, the finest armada in the Dominion, defeated in a single battle by a species he had dismissed as animals. Lyral stood at the back of the command chamber, watching. She said nothing. She did not need to. At the Galactic Forum, Ambassador Dalla Reyes, a Pelori diplomat with silver feathers and a voice that could silence a room, stood before the assembled representatives of over 100 species. The chamber fell quiet the moment she spoke. "I requested an emergency session 4 days ago to warn this forum about the Torvan Declaration of Subjugation against humanity. My request was denied. I was told it was an internal military matter." She paused and looked around the room. The Battle of New Garland lasted 4 hours. 300 Torvan warships were neutralized by a force of human volunteers, many of them civilians. The Torvan have never lost a battle before today. Now let me tell you something important. She leaned forward. This was not their military. This was their miners, their cargo pilots, and their mechanics. Their actual military has not arrived yet. And when it does, I suggest every species in this room decides very carefully which side of history they want to stand on. The chamber erupted into noise. Dalla Reyes sat down and folded her small hands in her lap. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharp. She had tried to stop this war before it started. No one had listened. Now everyone was listening. The news of the Battle of New Garland moved through the galaxy like fire through dry grass. It reached stations, colonies, outposts, and ships within hours. Every species heard it. Every government discussed it. And every civilization that had ever been bullied, threatened, or conquered by the Torvan Dominion felt something they had not felt in a very long time. Hope. On Farpent Station, the Torvan guards outside Danny's holding cell had stopped talking. They stood at their posts in silence, rifles held a little tighter than before, their black eyes flicking toward every sound in the corridor. They had heard the news too, 300 ships, gone, against civilians. Danny sat on his bench and listened to the quiet. He could feel the shift. When captors went silent, it meant they were afraid. A ventilation grate above him rattled, and Ollie Fenn's face appeared in the opening, upside down, smeared with grease and grinning like an idiot. "Hey, Captain," Ollie whispered, "miss me?" "How did you get in there?" Danny asked, not even slightly surprised. "Disguised myself as a Drotha cargo loader. Turns out if you wear a big enough coat and walk slowly, nobody questions you. Anyway, I brought you something." Ollie dropped a small communicator through the grate. Danny caught it and slipped it into his pocket. "Goss is waiting at the ship," Ollie said. "Reva is with him. She is very angry and very worried, which is her normal state. The station guards are distracted because half of them just got reassigned to defensive positions. The Torvan are scared, Danny, like really scared." "Good," Danny said. "Get back to the ship. I will find a way." "Out? I could break you out right now. I have a plasma cutter in my boot." "Why do you have a plasma cutter in your boot?" "Because I am an engineer, and I believe in being prepared." "Get back to the ship, Ollie." Ollie disappeared back into the vent with a faint scraping sound, and Danny was alone again. He turned on the communicator and connected to a secure channel that bounced through 6 relay stations before reaching Earth Sector Command. He did not call for rescue. He called to give information. Station layout, guard rotations, Torvon ship positions in the area. Then he asked one question. How long until you reach us? The response came from Admiral Calloway herself. Hold tight, Danny. We are coming, all of us. Across the galaxy, the tide was turning in ways the Torvon had never anticipated. The Pelori Confederation, a peaceful species that had not taken a military stance in over 3 centuries, announced that it would provide medical support, intelligence sharing, and refugee assistance to any species affected by Torvon aggression. This was diplomatic language for "we are helping the humans." The Drothi Collective, a species the Torvon had dismissed as harmless laborers, quietly began converting their massive cargo haulers into shield platforms and supply carriers for the human fleet. When the Torvon ambassador demanded an explanation, the Drothi representative said simply, "We carry things. Right now, we choose to carry what matters." But the most unexpected shift came from species the Torvon had conquered decades ago. The Fenari, a small amphibian race whose homeworld had been under Torvon control for 40 years, sent a secret message to Earth Sector Command offering the locations of every Torvon supply depot in their sector. The Ossic, a burrowing species that the Torvon used as forced laborers in their mining operations, began sabotaging equipment and smuggling communication devices to resistance cells. One by one, the Torvon's empire began to crack, not from the outside but from within. On the teeth of the empire, Sarvan refused to acknowledge what was happening. He paced his command chamber, his 4 arms clasped behind his back, and dictated orders to every fleet commander in the Dominion. Full mobilization, every ship, every soldier, every weapon. We will strike Earth itself, destroy their homeworld, and the rest will fall. Lyral stood at attention, her face carefully blank. She had given her warning. It had been ignored. Now she watched her prelate march toward a cliff and refused to look down. That night, Lyral made a decision. She accessed a private communication terminal, routed the signal through 11 different relay stations, and contacted Ambassador Dalarez at the Galactic Forum. "Ambassador," Lyral said, her voice low and steady. "I am Subcommander Lyral of the Torvon Dominion flagship. I am contacting you to offer fleet positions, patrol schedules, and battle plans for the upcoming assault on the Sol system." There was a long pause on the other end. "Why?" Dalarez asked. Lyral closed her eyes. "Because I have read the human file, all of it. I know what Sarvan is walking into. If he attacks Earth, the humans will not just fight back. They will come for everything we have. Every world, every station, every colony, not to conquer, to free. Every species we have subjugated for the last 200 years will rise up behind them, and the Torvon Dominion will cease to exist." "And you want to prevent that?" "I want to save my people, even if my people do not want to be saved." Dalarez was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Send everything you have." Lyral transmitted the files and cut the connection. She sat in the dark for a long time after that, listening to the hum of the ship around her. She had just betrayed her prelate, her fleet, and her entire civilization. And she knew, without any doubt, that it was the right thing to do. 2 days later, Admiral Calloway stood on the bridge of the human carrier ship Endurance and addressed the combined fleet via broadcast. Her voice was calm, clear, and carried the weight of every human who had ever fought for someone they loved. "I know many of you are scared. That is fine. Fear means you understand what is at stake. The Torvon Dominion has declared war on us because one man stood up for someone he cared about. One man, and now they want to punish all of us for that. They want to teach the galaxy that caring about someone is weakness, that protecting the people you love makes you a target." She paused. "They are wrong, and we are going to prove it. We do not start wars, but we finish them. We do not fight for territory or power. We fight for the person next to us. And right now, one of ours is sitting in a cell on Farpint Station because he would not let someone hurt. His family, that is who we are. That is what we protect, and that is why we will win." The channel was silent for a moment. Then a single voice came through, young, nervous, and steady. "This is Ollie Fenn, engineer aboard the Nomad. If anyone needs a plasma cutter, I have a spare one in my other boot." The fleet channel erupted in laughter. And somewhere in a holding cell on Farpent Station, Danny heard a commotion outside his door. A loud thud followed by a muffled Torvon curse followed by silence. The energy barrier dropped. Goss stood in the doorway, his enormous frame filling the entire opening. Behind him, two Torvon guards lay flat on the floor, unharmed but very compressed. "I sat on them," Goss said simply. Danny stared at him, then he laughed, a real deep laugh that he had not felt in weeks. "Let us go home, Goss. They are going to need every hand." The Torvon Grand Fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system like a storm rolling across an empty sky. 2,047 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a single, coordinated wave that rippled across the void. They stretched across the darkness in a formation so vast that their running lights looked like a second set of stars. High Prelate Sarvan stood at the center of his command bridge, all four hands clasped behind his back, his black eyes fixed on the tactical display. This was the largest military force the Torvon Dominion had ever assembled. Every active warship, every reserve vessel, every armed transport. He had emptied his empire to bring this hammer down on humanity's doorstep. He expected to see a desperate, scrambling defense. A handful of ships, perhaps. A panicked transmission begging for terms. Maybe silence the way New Garland had gone dark before the trap. What he saw was nothing. The Sol system was empty. No ships, no signals, no movement. Just the quiet glow of a yellow star surrounded by its planets, spinning in the dark the way they had for billions of years. "Full system scan," Sarvan ordered. The scan came back clean. No military vessels detected. No weapons platforms, no orbital defenses, nothing. Sarvan's officers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a young tactical officer, spoke up carefully. "Prelate, the absence of any defense force is concerning. At New Garland, the humans also appeared absent before the attack." "I am aware of what happened at New Garland." Sarvan snapped. "That was a skirmish against miners and cargo pilots. This is the Sol system, their home. If they had a fleet capable of stopping us, it would be here." He ordered the Grand Fleet to advance toward Earth. 2,000 ships moved inward past the outer planets, past the gas giants, past the asteroid belt. The silence held 10 minutes, 20, 30. Then the sensors screamed. It started at Jupiter. Ships appeared from behind the massive planet's shadow, rising from the swirling cloud bands where they had been hiding with engines cold, drifting on the giant's gravity like stones in a river. Dozens of them, then hundreds. Then Saturn's rings came alive. Human vessels emerged from within the ice and rock, shaking off frozen debris as they powered up their engines. They had been sitting inside the rings for days, camouflaged among the billions of particles, completely invisible to long-range scans. The asteroid belt erupted. Ships launched from hollowed-out rocks, from mining stations that had been quietly converted into launch platforms, from positions so deep inside the belt that no scan could reach them. And from Earth itself, the defense grid activated. Orbital platforms powered on in a cascading ring around the planet. Surface-to-space cannons rose from mountain ranges and ocean platforms. Drone swarms launched in waves so thick they appeared on Torvon sensors as solid walls of metal. Sarvan watched the tactical display flood with red signatures. His officers counted them as fast as they could. 2,300 human military vessels confirmed. Another 600 civilian ships, armed and operational. 12 allied species fleets detected, Pelori medical frigates, Drothai shield platforms, Fenari stealth scouts, Ossic communication jammers. Sarvan's jaw tightened. How did the Fenari get ships? We disarmed them 40 years ago. No one answered because the answer was obvious. The humans had armed them. The species the Torvon had conquered and forgotten had been quietly preparing for exactly this moment, and the humans had given them the means to fight. The battle for Earth began at 1400 hours, Sol Standard Time. The Torvan attacked the way they always had, in rigid formation, with clear hierarchy and layered defenses. Sarvan commanded from the center, issuing orders that flowed down through fleet commanders, wing leaders, and ship captains in an orderly chain. The humans did not have a chain, they had a network. Human ships moved in fluid, independent groups that shifted and adapted faster than the Torvan could track. They communicated in rapid bursts, sharing targeting data, threat assessments, and tactical adjustments in real time. When one group took fire, two others flanked the attacker. When a Torvan formation held firm, human ships simply flowed around it like water around a stone and struck from behind. The allied species fought alongside them. Pelori frigates moved through the chaos, picking up escape pods and treating wounded from both sides. Drothi haulers positioned themselves between human ships and incoming fire, their reinforced hulls absorbing hits that would have destroyed smaller vessels. Fenari scouts darted ahead of the human formations, marking Torvan positions and disrupting their communications. And through all of it, the Nomad flew. Danny piloted the old freighter through the battle with the calm steadiness of a man who had done hard things before. Ravas sat beside him, calling out incoming fire and coordinating with allied ships on the communication channels. In the engine room, Ollie worked at a speed that should not have been possible, rerouting power, patching hull breaches, and keeping the ship alive through sheer stubbornness. Goss stood at the cargo launcher, which Ollie had modified to fire emergency repair drones. Every time an allied ship took critical damage, Goss loaded a drone, aimed the launcher with surprising precision, and sent it flying across the battlefield. He had never fired a weapon in his life, but he had excellent aim with a cooking ladle, and the principle was apparently the same. The turning point came 3 hours into the battle. Sarvan's flagship, the Teeth of the Empire, was hit by a coordinated strike from 6 human destroyers that targeted its engines simultaneously. The massive ship shuddered, listed to one side, and went dark. Emergency power flickered on, bathing the bridge in red light. Sarvan stood in the center of the failing bridge and stared at the tactical display. His fleet was collapsing. Ships were being surrounded, disabled, and boarded. The humans were taking prisoners, offering medical aid, and treating wounded Torvan soldiers with the same care they gave their own. They were winning, and they were choosing mercy. Sarvan could not understand it. In every war the Torvan had ever fought, the victor destroyed the defeated. That was the natural order. You crushed your enemy so they could never rise again. But the humans were not crushing anything. They were catching, holding, preserving. His hand moved toward the self-destruct console. If he could not win, he would at least deny them the satisfaction of taking his ship. A voice came through his personal communication channel. Lyle's voice, clear and steady, transmitted from the Galactic Forum where she had been secretly cooperating with the Allies for days. "Prelate, do not do this." "You betrayed me," Sarvan said quietly. "I tried to save you. You would not let me. But I am asking you now one last time. Surrender. They will not kill you. They will not torture you. They will not destroy our worlds. That is what makes them dangerous, Prelate. You will have to live with what you have done." Sarvan's hand hovered over the console. The bridge was silent except for the groan of stressed metal and the distant sound of human boots moving through the lower decks. He lowered his hand. The bridge doors opened. Human Marines stepped through, weapons raised but not firing. They moved in careful, precise formation, checking corners and covering each other. The lead Marine, a woman with short, dark hair and steady hands, stopped in front of Sarvan and removed her helmet. "High Prelate Sarvan," she said, "you are under arrest for crimes against sentient life. You have the right to a fair trial before the Galactic Forum. We insist on it." Sarvan looked at her for a long moment. "You insist on giving me a trial," he repeated. "Yes, sir. Even after everything I have done. Especially after everything you have done, that is the point." Sarvan said nothing. He placed his 4 hands on the console in front of him, palms up, and allowed himself to be led away. Outside, the battle was ending. Torvan ships were surrendering across the system. Human vessels moved among them, towing the disabled, rescuing the stranded, and broadcasting on all channels that any Torvan who surrendered would be treated with dignity. Danny watched from the bridge of the Nomad as the last Torvan warship powered down its weapons. Ravas sat beside him, her wing fully healed, her small hand resting on his arm. "Is it over?" she asked. Danny looked out at the scattered remains of the battle, at the human and allied ships, moving through the debris like shepherds gathering a scattered flock. "Almost," he said. 3 months after the battle for Earth, the Galactic Forum was more crowded than it had been in a century. Representatives from over 100 species filled the vast chamber, their voices creating a low, constant hum that echoed off the high domed ceiling. Pelori diplomats in silver robes sat beside Drothi delegates who barely fit in their seats. Fenari ambassadors, free for the first time in 40 years, occupied chairs that had sat empty since their conquest. Ossic representatives blinked in the bright light of the chamber, unaccustomed to being above ground. And in the center of the room, standing in a circle of white light, was High Prelate Sarvan. He looked smaller than he had on his bridge. His exoskeleton, once polished to a dark mirror shine, was dull. His 4 arms hung at his sides. His black eyes stared straight ahead at nothing in particular. The trial had lasted 9 days. Witnesses from 27 species had testified. Colony leaders who had watched their worlds burn. Refugees who had lost everything. Soldiers who had followed orders they knew were wrong. The evidence was overwhelming, and Sarvan had not denied any of it. He had sat in silence through every testimony, every accusation, and every piece of evidence placed before the tribunal. The verdict was unanimous: guilty of unlawful aggression against sovereign species, guilty of forced subjugation, guilty of crimes against sentient life. The sentence was life imprisonment on a neutral world, monitored by the Galactic Forum, with no possibility of release. Before the sentence was carried out, Sarvan was given the right to speak. The chamber fell silent, every eye, every lens, every sensor turned toward him. He stood still for a long moment, then he spoke. "I have one question." The head judge, a Pelori elder with pale feathers and kind eyes, nodded. "You may ask it." Sarvan turned and looked directly at Admiral Calloway, who sat in the witness gallery with her hands folded in her lap. "Why did you not destroy us?" The chamber was silent. "You had every right," Sarvan continued. "We attacked your colony, we threatened your homeworld, we brought 2,000 warships to your doorstep. Any other species in this galaxy would have burned our worlds to ash in retaliation. Why did you not?" Calloway stood. She was not tall, she was not imposing. She was a middle-aged woman with gray streaks in her hair and tired eyes that had seen too many battles. But when she spoke, every being in the chamber listened. "Because we have been destroyed before," she said. "Not by aliens, by ourselves. We have burned our own cities. We have torn apart our own nations. We have done terrible things to each other throughout our history. And somewhere along the way, we made a decision, not all of us and not all at once, but enough of us. We decided that the measure of strength is not how much you can destroy. It is how much you can protect." She paused. "We did not spare your worlds out of weakness, Prelate. We spared them because we know what it feels like to lose everything. And we decided a long time ago that we would never do that to someone else if we had the choice." Sarvan stared at her. Something shifted behind his eyes, something that might have been understanding or might have been grief. He said nothing more. He was led away in silence. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy changed. The Torvan Dominion was formally dissolved. Its conquered worlds were returned to their original inhabitants. Torvan soldiers were given the choice to return home or to remain on the worlds where they had served, this time as citizens, not occupiers. Many chose to stay. Many were surprised to find that the species they had once ruled were willing to accept them. Lyra was appointed as the interim leader of the Torvan people. She accepted the role with visible reluctance, standing before a crowd of her own kind who looked at her with a mixture of hope and suspicion. "I did not betray our people," she told them. "I saved what was left of us, The old dominion is gone and it deserved to fall. What we build next is our choice. I suggest we choose better. It was not a popular speech, but it was an honest one, and over time, more Torvund began to listen. Ambassador Dalla Rez was awarded the Galactic Forum's highest honor for her efforts to prevent the war and her role in coordinating the alliance during the conflict. When she accepted the award, she said only, "I did not prevent anything. I just made sure the right people were listening when it mattered." The Fenari held a festival on their homeworld for the first time in 4 decades. They invited humans. The celebration lasted 3 days, and by the end of it, several human attendees had been adopted into Fenari family groups, which apparently involved a ceremony where the new family member was gently submerged in a warm mud bath while everyone sang. The humans went along with it. The Osik emerged from their underground cities into the sunlight and began rebuilding their surface settlements. A team of human engineers volunteered to help with the construction. When one of the Osik elders asked why the humans were helping for free, the engineer in charge shrugged and said, "You needed help. We were here. That is kind of how it works with us." And aboard the Nomad, things went back to normal. Goss cooked dinner every evening, experimenting with recipes from species he had met during the war. His Fenari stew was a work in progress. Ollie received 17 job offers from military fleets, private companies, and 2 different species governments, all of which he declined. "The Nomad needs me," he said. "Also, nobody else lets me keep plasma cutters in my boots." Ravaz's wing had healed completely. She still worried about everything, still read the overdue delivery list aloud every morning, and still made that small chirping sound when she was stressed. Danny would not have changed a single thing about her. Danny himself sat in the cargo hold one evening in the same spot where the story had begun. The same cracked floor plating, the same dim overhead light, the same faint hum of the ship's old engines working harder than they should. Ravaz found him there and sat beside him. For a while they said nothing, then she spoke. "Do you ever think about it? How all of this started because of one moment on a station?" Danny looked at his hands. The same hands that had broken an officer's arm, the same hands that had sealed hull breaches, carried wounded soldiers, and held Ravaz's small feathered hand when she was afraid. "I think about it every day," he said. "Would you do it again?" He looked at her every single time. Ravaz leaned her head against his shoulder and closed her eyes. Danny put his arm around her and listened to the ship breathe. The next morning, the Nomad undocked from the Galactic Forum and drifted into open space. Ollie and Goss were already arguing about the water recycler. Ravaz was reading the delivery contracts. Danny was patching a new leak. Everything was exactly as it had been before. But across the galaxy, in every species archive, on every station's database, and in every government's threat assessment, a single file had been quietly updated. Under the listing for Homo sapiens, Earth, classification Deathworld Category 9, a new note had been added. It read, "Do not engage, do not provoke, do not threaten what they love. They do not conquer, they do not forget, and they do not stop." Far below the note, someone from the Fenari delegation had added a small, unofficial comment. "Also, they are surprisingly good at mud baths.